Waterwood, back home. Chapter 6, Gateways. And woke in total darkness and lay there beneath his blankets trying to think of what had wakened him. It had been something, not the dream. He'd been teaching Alienda how to swim in a pond in Waterwood, back home in the Two Rivers. Something else. Then it came again, like a faint whiff of a foul miasma creeping under the floor. Not a smell at all, really. A sense of otherness. But that was how it felt. Rank, like something dead or weak in stagnant water. It faded again, but not all the way this time. Tossing aside his blankets, he stood up, wrapping himself in sardine. Inside the void, filled with the power, he could feel his body shiver. The cold seemed in another place from where he was. Cautiously, he pulled open the door and stepped out. Arched windows at either end of the corridor let in falls of moonlight. After the pitch black of his room, it was nearly like day. Nothing moved, but he could feel something coming closer. Something evil. It felt like the taint that roared through him on the power. One hand went to his coat pocket, to the small carved figure of a round little man holding a sword across his knees. An Angreal. With that he could channel more of the power than even he could safely handle unaided. He thought it would not be necessary. Whoever had sent this attack against him did not know who they were dealing with now. They should never have let him wake. For a moment he hesitated. He could take the fight to whatever had been sent against him, but he thought it was still below him, down where the maidens were still sleeping by the silence. With luck, it would not bother them, unless he rushed down to battle it in their midst. That would surely wake them, and they would not stand by and watch. Lan said that you should choose your ground if you could, and make your enemy come to you. Smiling, he raced the thud of his boots up the nearest curving stairway, on upward until he reached the top floor. The highest level of the building was one large chamber, a slightly domed ceiling, and scattered thin columns fluted in spirals. Glassless arched windows all around flooded every corner with moonlight. The dust and grit and sand on the floor still faintly showed his own footprints from the one time he had come up here, and no other mark. It was perfect. Crowding to the center of the room, he planted himself atop the mosaic there, the ancient symbol of the Aes Sedai, 10 feet across. It was an apt place. Under this sign will he conquer. That was what the prophecy of Rudion said of him. He stood straddling the sinuous dividing line, one boot on the black teardrop that was now called the Dragon's Fang, and used to represent evil, the other on the white, now called the Flame of Tarvalon. Some men said it stood for the light, an appropriate place to meet this attack between light and darkness. The fetid feel grew stronger, and a burned sulfur smell filled the air. Suddenly things moved, slinking away from the stairs like moon shadows along the outside of the room. Finally they resolved into 3 black dogs, darker than night and big as ponies. Eyes shining silver, they circled him warily. With the power in him, he could hear their hearts beat, like deep drums pounding. He could not hear them breathe, though. Perhaps they did not. He channeled, and a sword was in his hands, its slightly curving heron-marked blade seeming hammered out of fire. He had expected Murdraw, or something even worse than the eyeless. But for dogs, even shadow-spawn dogs, the sword would be enough. Whoever had sent them did not know him. Lan said he had very nearly reached the level of a blade master now, and the warder was sparing enough with praise to make him think he might have passed on to that level already. Snarls like bones being ground to dust, the dogs hurtled at him from 3 sides, faster than galloping horses. He did not move until they were almost on him. Then he flowed, one with the sword, move to move, as though dancing. In the blink of an eye, the sword form called Whirlwind on the mountain became the wind blows over the wall, became unfolding the fan. Great black heads flew apart from black bodies, their dripping teeth like burnished steel, still bared as they bounced across the floor. He was already stepping through the mosaic as the latched in twitching, bleeding heaps. Laughing to himself, he let the sword go, though he held on to Saidin, to the raging power, the sweetness, and the taint. Contempt slid along the outside of the void. Dogs. Shadow spawn, certainly, but still just laughter died. Slowly, the dead dogs and their heads were melting, settling into pools of liquid shadow that quivered slightly, as if alive. Their blood, fanned across the floor, trembled. Suddenly, the smaller pools flowed across the floor in viscous streams to merge with the larger, which oozed away from the mosaic to mount higher and higher, until the three huge black dogs stood there once more, slavering and snarling as they gathered massive haunches under them. He did not know why he felt surprise, dim outside the emptiness.
Hey, Poison, how you doing?
Dogs, yes, but shadows.
Good to see you.
Whoever had sent them had not been as careless as he had thought, but they still did not know.
It's over here. Finishing this bowl off.
Again, he channeled as he
How's your morning going?
Howling, the huge dogs leaped, and a thick shaft of white light shot from his hand.
Definitely appreciate you stopping by.
Like liquid fire. He swept it across the springing creatures. For an instant, they became shadows of themselves, all colors reversed.
Not doing too bad. I can't complain.
Apart, smaller and smaller, until there
well, I can, but you know how that goes.
He let go of the thing he had made with a grim smile. A purple bar of light still seemed to cross his vision in afterimage. Across the great chamber, a piece of one of the columns crashed to the floor tiles.
Oh shit, damn.
Where that bar of light, or whatever it had been, not light exactly, had swung, neat slices were gone from the columns. A gaping swath cut half the width of the wall behind them. Did any of them bite you or bleed on you? He spun at the sound of Maureen's voice. Absorbed in what he had done, he had not heard her come up the stairs. She stood clutching her skirts with both hands, peering at him, face lost in moonshadow. She would have sensed the things the same way he did, but to be here so quickly, she must have run. The maidens let you pass?
You definitely get some sleep, bro. Especially since it's almost morning time for you. Oh, it is morning time for you.
In a rush. Impatience, raw and are usually melodious.
That's how I am too.
I told the guards I had to speak with you urgently. Now answer me. Did the dark hound...
Give me 1 second, I gotta go grab my other controller real quick.
No, he answered slowly. Dark hounds.
Well, that's how
knew he had gotten from old stories.
That's how I am too. I can't hardly sleep.
Some grown-ups believe.
That's why I do these lives.
Why should a bite worry you?
Smoke, listen to a book.
Does this mean the dark?
I figure I help other people too. But give me 1 second.
The tales he had heard said the dark hounds ran the night in the wild hunt, with the dark one himself the hunter. They left no print on even the softest dirt, only on stone, and they would not stop until you faced and defeated them, or put running water between you. Crossroads were supposed to be particularly dangerous places to meet them, and the time just after sunset or just before sunrise. He had seen enough old stories walking by now to believe that any of it could be true. No, not that. She seemed to be regaining her self-control. Her voice was silver chimes again, calm and cool. They are only another kind of shadow spawn, something that should never have been made.
1 second.
Bite is death as surely as a dagger in the heart. And I do not think I could have healed such a wound with what killed you. Their blood, even their saliva, is poison. A drop on the skin can kill. Slowly.
Yeah, I used to be able to sleep fine too, but
you are lucky there were only
I've had a lot of stuff happen to me, so that might be the reason why I don't sleep too good.
Are usually larger, as many as 10 or 12. Or so say the scraps left from the War of the Shadow. Archer packs. He was not the only target in Rodion for one of the Forsaken. We must speak of what you used to kill.
Oh, damn. Yeah, smoking definitely helps out for sleep. That's one of the reasons I got my medical card, among other reasons.
Down flights of stairs through darkened corridors, where sleepy maidens roused by the pounding boots peered at him in consternation from moonlit rooms. Through the front doors, where a man stood restlessly, with the two women on guard, his color-shifting warder's cloak about his shoulders, making parts of him seem to blend into the night. "Where is Moraine?" he shouted, as Rand dashed by. But Rand leaped down the broad steps, two at a time, without replying. The half-healed wound in his side clenched like a fist, pain he was only vaguely aware of inside the void. By the time he reached the building, he saw it. It stood at the very edge of Rudion, far from the plaza, as far from the camp Moraine shared with the Wise Ones as it was possible to be and remain in the city. The upper floors
I've been smoking for a long time.
Cracked earth beyond the pavement. Only the bottom two floors remained whole. Refusing his body's efforts to hunch over around the pane, he went in, still at a dead run. Once the great antechamber, encircled by a stone balcony, had been tall. Now it was taller, open to the night sky, its pale stone floor strewn with rubble from the collapse. In the moon shadows beneath the balcony, 3 dark hounds were up on their hind legs, clawing and chewing at a bronze-clad door that shivered under their assault. The smell of burnt sulfur hung strong in the air. Remembering what had happened before, Rand darted to one side as he channeled, a shaft of liquid white light streaking by the door as it destroyed the shadow spawn. He had tried to make it less this time, to confine the destruction to the dark hounds, but the thick wall at the far end of the chamber...
Oh, damn, that sucks.
Not all the way through, he thought. It was hard to tell by moonlight. But he would have to refine his control of this weapon. The bronze sheathing on the door was tattered and torn, as though the teeth and toenails of the dark hounds really had been steel. Lamplight shone through a number of small holes. There were fault holes in the floor, surprisingly few. Releasing Saladin, a place where he would not cut his hand to shreds, and pounded on the door. Suddenly the pain in his side was very real and present. He took a deep breath and tried to thrust it away. "Matt! It's me, Rand. Open up, Matt!" For a moment, the door opened a crack, letting out a spill of lamplight. Matt peered through doubtfully, then pulled the door wider, leaning against it as if he had run 10 miles carrying a sack of rocks. Except for a silver fox-head medallion hanging around his neck, its eyes shaped and shaded like the ancient Aes Sedai symbol, he was naked. The way Matt felt about Aes Sedai, Rand was surprised he had not sold the thing long since. For in the room, a tall, golden-haired woman was calmly wrapping a blanket around herself. A maiden, by the spears and buckler lying at her feet. And hastily averted his eyes and cleared his throat. "I just wanted to make sure you were all right." "We're fine." Uneasily, Matt looked around the antechamber. "Now we are." "You killed it or something?" "I don't want to know what it was as long as it's gone. It's bloody hard on a man sometimes being your friend." Not only a friend. Another Taviran, and perhaps a key to victory.
No shit.
Anyone who wanted to strike at Rand had reason to strike at Matt.
That's what I was just hitting with some bubble hash.
"They're gone, Matt. Dark hounds, 3 of them." "Told you I didn't want to know," Matt groaned. "Dark hounds now. I can't say it isn't always something new around you. A man wouldn't get bored.
Good little
not until
hash
the day
pipe.
he died. If I hadn't been on my feet for a drink of wine when the door started to open..." He trailed off, shivering, and scratched a red place on his right arm as he studied the ravaged metal sheathing. "You know, it's funny how the mind plays tricks. When I was putting everything I had into holding this door shut, I could have sworn one of them had chewed a hole right through it. I could see its bloody head. And its teeth. Melindra's spear didn't even phase it." Fane's arrival was more spectacular this time, running in, skirts held up, panting and fuming. Lan was at her heels with his sword in hand and thunderclouds on his stone face, and right behind, a throng of Barder-Eyes Mai that spilled out into the street. Some of the maidens wore no more than small clothes. but everyone held her spear
Excuse me.
shortly and had her shuka wrapped around her head, black veil hiding all but her eyes, ready to kill. Moraine and Lan, at least, looked relieved to see him standing there calmly talking to Matt, though the Aes Sedai also looked as if she meant to have strong words with him. The Veils, it was impossible to tell what the Aiel thought. Letting out a loud whelp, Matt darted back into his room and began hastily tugging on a pair of breeches, his capering impeded by the way he kept trying to haul at the breeches and scratch his arm at the same time. The golden-haired maiden watched with a broad grin that threatened to break into laughter. "What's the matter with your arm?" Rand asked. "I told you the mind plays funny tricks," Matt said, still trying to scratch and pull at the same time. "When I thought that thing chewed through the door, I thought it slobbered all over my arm, too. And now it bloody itches like fire. Even looks like a burn there." He opened his mouth, but Moraine was already pushing past him. Staring at her, Matt fell down while frantically dragging his breeches on the rest of the way, but she knelt beside him, ignoring his protests, clasping his head in her hands. Rand had been healed before and had seen it done. But instead of what he expected, Matt only gave a shiver and lifted up the medallion by its leather thong so that it hung against his hand. "Bloody thing is colder than ice all of a sudden," he muttered. "What are you doing, Moraine? If you want to do something, heal this itch. There's my whole arm now." His right arm was red from wrist to shoulder, and had begun to look puffy. Moraine stared at him with the most startled expression Rand had ever seen on her face. Maybe the only one. "I will," she said slowly. "If the medallion is cold, take it off." I frowned at her, then finally pulled it over his head and laid it beside him. She took his head again, and he gave a shout as if he had been ducked head first into ice. His legs stiffened, and his back arched. His eyes stared at nothing, as wide as they would go. When Moraine took her hands away, he slumped, gulping air. The redness and swelling were gone. It took 3 tries before he could speak. "What? Ashes! Does it have to be that flaming white every flaming time? It was just a bloody itch." "You watch your tongue with me," Moraine told him, getting up.
That's why I do it, is to help me sleep, or if anyone else needs it, them to help them sleep.
She was trying not to
Listen to her book, smoke a little bit.
"We'll need rest," she said absently. "Stay in bed tomorrow if you feel like it." The maiden in the blanket, Melinda, knelt behind Matt and put her hands on his shoulders, looking up at Moraine over his head. "I'll see that he does as you say, Aes Sedai." With a sudden grin, she ruffled his hair. "He is my little mischief maker now." From the horrified look on Matt's face, he was gathering his strength to run. Rand became aware of soft, amused chuckles behind him. The maidens, shupas and veils around their shoulders now, had crowded around and were peering into the room. "Teach him to sing, Spear Sister," Madeline said, and the other maidens crowed with laughter. Rand rounded on them firmly. "Let the man rest. Don't some of you have to put on clothes?" They gave way reluctantly, still trying to peer into the room, until Moraine came out. "You leave us, please," the Aes Sedai said, as the mangled door banged shut behind her. She half looked back with a vexed tightening of her mouth. "I must speak with Randolph Thor alone." Nodding, the Aiel women started for the door, some still jesting about whether Melindra, a shadow it seemed, Rand wondered if Matt knew that, would teach Matt to sing, whatever that meant. And stopped Adeline with a hand on her bare arm. Others who noticed stopped as well, so he spoke to them all. "You will not go when I tell you to. What will you do if I have to use you in battle?" He did not intend to if he could help it. He knew they were fierce warriors, but he had been raised to believe it was a man's place to die if necessary before a woman had to. Logic might say it was foolish, especially with women like this, but that was how he felt. He knew better than to tell them that, however. "Will you think it is a joke, or decide to go in your own good time?" They looked at him with the consternation of those listening to someone who had revealed his ignorance of the simplest facts. "The dance of spears," Adlin told him. "We will go as you direct, but this is not the dance. Besides, you did not tell us to go." "Ilamaka Khan is not a wetlander king," the gray-haired maiden added. Sinewy and hard despite her age, she wore only a short shift and her shuka. He was tired of getting that phrase. Maidens resumed their joking as they left him alone with Moraine and Lan. The warder had finally put up his sword and looked as at ease as he ever did. Which was to say, as still and calm as his face, all stony plains and angles in the moonlight, and with an air of being on the brink of sudden movement that made the Aiel appear placid in comparison. Braided leather cord held Lan's hair, graying at the temples, back from his face. His gaze could have come from a blue-eyed hawk. "Must speak with you about," Moraine began. "We can talk tomorrow," Rand said, cutting her off. Lan's face hardened further, if such was possible. Warders were far more protective of their Aes Sedai, of their position, as well as their persons, than they were of themselves. Rand ignored Lan. His side still wanted to hunch him over, but he managed to keep erect. He was not about to show her any weakness. "If you think I'll help you get that foxhead away from Matt, you can think again." Somehow that medallion had stopped her channeling. Or at least it had stopped her channeling from affecting Matt while he touched it. "Paid a hard price for it, Moraine, and it is his." Thinking of how she had thumped his shoulders with the power, he added dryly, "Maybe I'll ask if I can borrow it from him." He turned away from her. There was still one he had to check on, though one way or another the urgency was gone. The Darkhounds would have done what they intended by now. "Please, Rand," Moraine said, and the open pleading in her voice halted him in his tracks. He had never heard anything like that from her before. The tone seemed to offend Lan. "I thought you had become a man," the warder said harshly. "Is this how a man behaves? You act like an arrogant boy." Lan practiced the sword with him, and liked him, Rand thought. But if Moraine said the right word, the warder would do his best to kill him. "We'll not be with you forever," Moraine said urgently. Her hands gripped her skirts so hard that they trembled. "I might die in the next attack. I could fall from my horse and break my neck, or take a dark friend's arrow through my heart. And death cannot be healed. I have given my entire life to the search for you, to find you and help you. You still do not know your own strength, and you cannot know half of what you do. I apologize most humbly for any offense I have given you." Those words he had never thought to hear from her, came out as if dragged, but they came, and she could not lie. "Let me help you as much as I can, while I can. Please. It's hard to trust you, Moraine." He disregarded Lan, shifting in the moonlight. His attention was all on her. "You have handled me like a puppet, made me dance the way you wanted from the day we met. The only times I've been free of you were either when you were far away or when I ignored you. And you make even that hard." Her laugh was as silvery as the moon above, but bitterness tinged it. "It has been more like wrestling with a bear than pulling strings on a puppet. Do you want an oath not to try manipulating you? I give it." Her voice hardened to crystal. "I swear to obey you, like one of the maidens, like one of the Gaishain, if you require. But you must—" Taking a deep breath, she began again, more softly. "I ask you, humbly, to allow me to help you." Lan was staring at her, and Rand thought his own eyes must be popping out of his head. "We'll accept your help," he said slowly. "And I apologize, too, for all the rudeness I've shown." And the feeling he was still being manipulated It had good cause to be rude when he was, but she could not lie. Tension drained from her visibly. She stepped closer to look up at him. You used to kill the dark hounds is called bale fire. I can still sense the residue of it here. He could too, like the fading smell remaining after a pie was carried out of the room, or the memory of something just snatched out of sight. Since before the breaking of the world, the use of bale fire has been forbidden. The White Tower forbids us even to learn it. In the War of Power, the Forsaken and the Shadow Sworn themselves used it only reluctantly. Forbidden, Rand said, frowning. I saw you use it once. He could not be sure in the pale light of the moon, but he thought color flamed in her cheeks. For this once, perhaps she was the one off balance. Sometimes it is necessary to do that which is forbidden. If she was flustered, it did not show in her voice. When anything is destroyed with balefire, it ceases to exist before the moment of its destruction, like a thread that burns away from where the flame touched it. The greater the power of the balefire, the further back in time it ceases to exist. The strongest I can manage will remove only a few seconds from the pattern. You are much stronger, very much so. If it doesn't exist before you destroy it, Rand raked fingers through his hair in confusion. You begin to see the problems, the dangers. I remember seeing one of the dark hands chew through the door, but there is no opening now. If it had slavered on him as much as he remembers, he would have been dead before I could reach him. For as far back as you destroyed the creature, whatever it did during that time no longer happened. Only the memories remain for those who saw or experienced it. Only what it did before is real, now. Few tooth holes in the door and one drop of saliva on Matt's arm. That sounds just fine to me, he told her. Matt's alive because of it. It is terrible, Rand. An urgent note entered her voice. Why do you think even the Forsaken feared to use it? Think of the effect on the pattern of a single thread, one man, removed from hours or days that have already been woven, like one thread picked partly out of a piece of cloth. Fragments of manuscripts remaining from the War of Power say several entire cities were destroyed with balefire before both sides realized the dangers. Hundreds of thousands of threads pulled from the pattern, gone for days already past. Whatever those people had done now no longer had been done, and neither had what others had done because of their actions. The memories remained, but not the actions. The ripples were incalculable. The pattern itself nearly unraveled. It could have been the destruction of everything. World, time, creation itself. Rand shivered, nothing to do with the cold cutting through his coat. Can't promise not to use it again, Lorraine. You yourself said there are times when it's necessary to do what's forbidden. I did not think that you would, she said coolly. Her agitation was vanishing, her balance restored. But you must be careful. She was back to must again. With a sangreal like Kalendor, you could annihilate a city with balefire. The pattern could be disrupted for years to come. Who can say that the weave would even remain centered on you, Taviran as you are, until it settled down? Being Taviran, and so strongly so, may be your margin of victory, even in the last battle. Perhaps it will, he said bleakly. In tale after heroic tale, the protagonist proclaimed he would have victory or death. It seemed that the best he could hope for was victory and death. I have to check on someone, he went on quietly. I will see you in the morning. Gathering the power into him, life and death in swirling layers, he made a hole in the air taller than he was, opening into blackness that made the moonlight seem day. A gateway, Osmodi called it. What is that? Lorraine gasped. Once I've done something, I remember how. Most of the time. That That was no answer, but it was time to test Moraine's vows. She could not lie, but Aes Sedai could find loopholes in a stone. You are to leave Matt alone tonight, and you won't try to take that medallion away from him. It belongs in the Tower for Study, Rand. It must be a Tirangrial, but none has ever been found that... Whatever it is, he said firmly, it is his. You will leave it with him. A moment she seemed to struggle with herself, back stiffening and head coming up as she stared at him. She could not be used to taking orders from anyone except Swan Sanche. Rand was willing to wager she had never done that without a tussle. Finally, she nodded, and even made the suggestion of a curtsy. As you say, Rand, it is his. Please be careful, Rand. Learning a thing like balefire by yourself can be suicide, and death cannot be healed. This time there was no mockery. Until the morning. Lan followed her as she left, the warder giving Rand an unreadable expression. He would not be pleased by this turn of events. And stepped through the gateway, and it vanished. He was standing on a disc, a 6-foot copy of the ancient Aes Sedai symbol. Even the black half of it seemed lighter against the endless darkness that surrounded him, above and below. He was sure that if he fell off, he would fall forever. Asmodean claimed there was a faster method called traveling for using a gateway, but he had not been able to teach it, partly because he did not have the strength to make a gateway while wearing Lanfear's shield. In any case, traveling required that you know your starting point very well. It seemed more logical to him that you should have to know where you were heading well, but Asmodean seemed to think that that was like asking why air was not water. There was a great deal that Asmodean took for granted. Anyway, skimming was fast enough. As soon as he planted his boots on it, the disc lurched what seemed to be a foot and stopped, another gateway appearing in front of it. Fast enough, especially over this short distance. Rand stepped into the hallway outside the room where Asmodean was. The moon through the windows at the ends of the corridor gave the only light. Asmodean's lamp was out. The clothes he had woven around the room were still in place, still firmly tied. Nothing moved, but there was still a faint smell of burned sulfur. Moving close to the bead curtain, he peered through the doorway. Moon shadows filled the room, but one of them was Asmodean tossing in his blankets. Wrapped in the void, Rand could hear his heartbeat, smell the sweat of troubled dreams. He bent to examine the pale blue floor tiles, and the prints impressed him. He learned to track as a boy, and reading them was no difficulty. 3 or 4 Darkhounds had been there. They had approached the doorway one by one, it seemed, each stepping almost in the other's footprints. Had the net woven around the room stopped them there? Or had they merely been sent to look and report? Troubling to think of even shadow-spawn dogs having that much intelligence. Then Murgrel used ravens and rats for spies, too, and other animals closely linked to death. Shadow eyes, the Aiel called them. Channeling fine flows of earth, he smoothed out the floor tiles, lifting up the compressions until he was out in the empty, night-cloaked street and 100 faces in the tall building. In the morning, anyone would be able to see the trail ending there, but none would suspect that the Darkhounds had gone anywhere near Asmodean. Darkhounds would have no interest in chasing the tail of the Gleeman. Every maiden in the city was likely awake by this time. Certainly none would still be asleep under the roof of the maidens. Making another gateway, there in the street, a deeper blackness against the night, he let the disc carry him back to his own room. He wondered why he had chosen the ancient symbol. It was his choice, if unconscious. Other times it had been a stair-step or a piece of floor. The Darkhounds had oozed away from that sign before reforming. Under this sign will he conquer. Standing in his pitch-black bedchamber, he channeled the lamp's light. But he did not let go of Saidina. Instead, he channeled again, careful not to spring any of his own traps, and a piece of wall vanished, revealing a niche he had carved there himself. In the little alcove stood 2 figurines, a foot tall, man and a woman, each in flowing robes and serene of face, each holding a crystal globe aloft in one hand. He had lied to Osmodian about them. There were Angreal, like the round little man in Ryan's coat pocket, and Sa Angreal, like Kalimdor, that increased the amount of the power that could be safely handled as much over Angreal as Angreal did over channeling unaided. Both were very rare and prized by Aes Sedai, though they could only recognize those attuned to women and Saidar. These two figures were something else, not so rare, but just as highly valued. Tir Angreal had been made to use the power, not magnify it, but to use it in specific ways. The Aes Sedai did not know the intended purpose, even of most Tir Angreal they had in the White Tower. Some they used, but without knowing whether the use they put them to was anything like the function they had been made for. Rand knew the function of these two. The male figure could link him to a huge replica of itself, the most powerful male Sa Angreal ever made, even if he were on the other side of the Arctic Ocean from it. It had only been finished after the Dark One's prison was resealed and hidden before any of the male Aes Sedai going mad could find it. The female figure could do the same for a woman, joining her to the female equivalent of the great statue he hoped was still almost completely buried in Cardian. With that much power, Moraine had said death could not be healed. Unbidden, unwanted, memory returned of the next to last time he had dared let himself hold Kalimdor, images floating beyond the void. The body of the dark-haired girl, little more than a child, lay sprawled, with eyes wide and fixed on the ceiling, blood blackening the bosom of her dress where Trolloc had run her through. Power was in him. Kalimdor blazed, and he was the power. He channeled, directing flows into the child's body, searching, trying, fumbling. She lurched to her feet, arms and legs unnaturally rigid and jerky. "Rand, you cannot do this," Moraine cried. "Not this." Breathe. She had to breathe. The girl's chest rose and fell. Heart had to beat. Blood already thick and dark oozed from the wound in her chest. "Live, burn you," his mind howled. "I didn't mean to be too late." Her eyes stared at him, filmed, heedless of all the power in him. Lifeless. Tears trickled unheeded down his cheeks. Forced the memory away roughly. Even encased in the void, it hurt. With this much power, he could not be trusted. "Or not the Creator," Ryan had told him as he stood over that child. But with that male figure, with only half of its power, he had made the mountains move once. With far less, with only Kalimdor, he had been sure he could turn back the wheel, make a dead child live. Not only the one power was seductive, the power of it was too. He should destroy them both. Instead, he rewove the flows, reset the traps. "What are you doing there?" a woman's voice said as the wall became apparently whole again. Tying off the flows hastily, and the knot with its own deadly surprises, he pulled the power into him and turned. Beside Lanfear, in her white and silver, Elaine or Min or Avienda would look almost ordinary. Her dark eyes alone were enough to make a man give up his soul. At the sight of her, his stomach clenched until he wanted to vomit. "What do you want?" he demanded. Once he had blocked Egwene and Elaine both from the true source, but he could not remember how. So long as Lanfear could touch the source, he had more chance of catching the wind in his hands than of holding a prisoner. One flash of balefire, and he could not do it. She was one of the Forsaken, but the memory of a woman's head rolling on the ground stopped him dead. "You have two of them," she said finally. "I thought I glimpsed. One is a woman, isn't it?" A smile could have halted a man's heart and made him grateful. "You are beginning to consider my plan, aren't you? With those together, The other chosen will kneel at our feet. We can supplant the great Lord himself, challenge the Creator. You are always ambitious, Mirren. His voice grated in his ears. Why do you think I turned away from you? It wasn't Ilyena, whatever you like to think. You were out of my heart long before I ever met her. Ambition is all there is to you. Power is all you ever wanted. You disgust me. She stared at him, both hands pressed hard against her stomach, her dark eyes even larger than usual. And Dulcet, she began faintly. Swallowing, she began again. Who's there? Love you, Ruth Theron. I've always loved you, and I always will. You know that. You must. Rand's face was like rock. He hoped it hid his shock. He had no idea where his words had come from, but it seemed he could remember her. A dim memory from before. I am not Ruth Theron.
I'll be right back, everyone.
He said harshly. Of course you are. Studying him, she nodded slowly to herself. That cool composure returned. Of course. Asmodean has been telling me things about the War of Power and me. He lies. You did love me. Until that yellow-haired trollop Ilyena stole you. For an instant, rage made her face a contorted mask. He did not think she was even aware of it. Did you know that Asmodean severed his own mother? What they call stilling now. Severed her and let Murdrol drag her away screaming. You trust a man like that? Brand laughed aloud. After I caught him, you helped trap him, so he had to teach me. And now you say I cannot trust him? For teaching? She sniffed dismissively. He will do that because he knows his lot has passed with you for good. Even if he managed to convince the others that he has been a prisoner, they would still tear him apart, and he knows it. The weakest dog in the pack often suffers that fate. Besides, I watch his dreams on occasion. He dreams of you triumphing over the great Lord and putting him up beside you on high. Sometimes he dreams of me. Her smile said that it was pleasant for her, but not so for Asmodean. But he will try to turn you against me. Why are you here? He demanded. Turn against her? I doubt she was full of the power right that moment, ready to shield him if she even suspected he meant to try anything. She had done it before, with humiliating ease. I like you like this, arrogant and proud, full of your own strength. Once she had said that she liked him unsure, that Ruth Theron had been too arrogant. Why are you here? Having sent the dark hounds after you tonight, she said calmly, folding her hands at her waist. I would have come sooner to help you, but I cannot let the others know I am on your side here. On his side. One of the Forsaken loved him, or rather, the man he had been 3,000 years ago, and all she wanted was for him to give his soul to the Shadow and rule the world with her. Or a step below her, at least. Let them try to replace both the Dark One and the Creator. Was she completely mad? Or could the power of those two huge Sa'angreal really be as great as she claimed? That was a direction he did not want his thoughts to take. Why would Robin choose now to attack me? Asmodean says he looks to his own interests, that he'll sit to one side, even in the last battle, if he can, and wait for the Dark One to destroy me. Why not Samael, or Demandred? Asmodean says they hate me. Not me. They hate Ruth Theron. But to the Forsaken, that was the same thing. He's lying. I am Randall Thor. He pushed away a sudden memory of this woman in his arms, both of them young and just learning what they could do with the power. I am Randall Thor. Why not Semirog, or Mogadien, or Gren? But you are impinging on his interests now. She laughed. Don't you know where he is? In Andor, in Kingman itself. He rules there in all but name. Morgaze simpers and dances for him. Her and half a dozen others. Her lip curled in disgust. He has men scouring town and countryside to find new pretties for him. For a moment, shock held him. Elaine's mother in the hands of one of the Forsaken. Yet he dared not show concern. Lanfear displayed her jealousy more than once. She was capable of hunting Elaine down and killing her, if she even thought he had feelings for her. Do I feel for her? Aside from that, one hard fact floated beyond the void, cold and cruel in its truth. He would not run off to attack Robin, even if what Lanfear said was true. Forgive me, Elaine, but I can't. She might well be lying. She would weep no tears for any of the other Forsaken.
I'll be right back, everyone.
They all stood in the way of her own plans. But in any event, he was done with reacting to what others did. If he reacted, they could reason out what he would do. Let them react to him, and be as surprised as Lanfear and Osmodian have been. Does Robin think I'll rush to defend Morgaze? He said. I've seen her once in my life. The Two Rivers is part of Andor on a map, but I never saw a Queen's Guardsman there. No one has in generations. Tell that Two Rivers man Morgaze is his queen, and he'll probably think you're crazy. Doubt Robin expects you to run to defend your homeland, Lanfear said wryly. But he will expect you to defend your ambitions. He means to sit Morgaze on the Sun Throne, too, and use her like a puppet until the time he can come into the open. 4 Andoran soldiers move into Carian every day. And you sent tyrant soldiers north to secure your own hold on the land. No wonder that he attacked you as soon as he found you. Brand shook his head. It had not been that way at all, sending the tyrant, but he did not expect her to understand. Or believe him if he told her, for that matter. I thank you for the warning. The likeness to one of the Forsaken. Of course, there was nothing he could do except hope that some of what she told me was true. A good reason not to kill her. She'll tell you more than she thinks if you listen carefully. He hoped that was his own thought, chill and cynical as it was. Ward your dreams against me. Against everyone. That was simple truth, though she was at least as prominent in the list as the wise ones. Dreams are mine. You and your dreams are mine, especially. Her face remained smooth, but her voice hardened. I can break through your wood. You would not like it. Showing his unconcern, he sat down at the foot of his pallet, legs folded and hands on his knees. He thought his face was as calm as hers. Inside him, the power swelled. He had flows of air ready to bind her and flows of spirit. That was what Will was showing source. The racking of his brain, for the hell of it, seemed far off. I could not remember anyway. The other was useless. She could pick apart and prove anything you wove, even if you could not see it. Asmodian was trying to teach him that trick, but it was hard going without a woman's weaving to practice on. Lanfear eyed him in a disconcerted fashion, a slight frown marring her beauty. I've examined the Aiel women's dreams, these so-called wise ones. They do not know how to shield themselves very well. I could frighten them till they never dream again, never even think of invading yours, surely. I thought you would not help me openly. He did not dare tell her to leave the wise ones alone. She might well do something to spite him. She had made it plain from the start, if not in words, that she meant to have the upper hand between them. Wouldn't that risk another of the Forsaken finding out? You aren't the only one who knows how to enter people's dreams. Chosen, she said absently. For a moment, she chewed a full underlip. I've watched the girls' dreams, too. Egwene. Once I thought you had feelings for her. You know who she dreams of? Morghese's son and stepson. The son Gawain most often. Smiling, she put on a tone of mock shock. You would not believe a simple country girl could have such dreams. He was trying to test his jealousy, he realized. She really thought he warded his dreams to hide thoughts of another woman. The maidens guard me closely, he said dryly. If you want to know how close, look at Essendra's dreams. Spots of color flared in her cheeks. Of course. He was not supposed to see what she was trying. Confusion rolled outside the void. What did she think? Essendra. Lanfear knew she was a dark friend. Lanfear had brought Kadir and the woman to the waste in the first place, and planted most of the jewelry Essendra was accused of stealing. Lanfear's spite was cruel, even when petty. Still, if she thought he could love her, Essendra being a dark friend was probably no obstacle in her eyes. Should have let them send her off to try reaching the dragon wall, he went on casually. But who knows what she might have said to save herself. I must protect her and Kadir to some extent in order to protect everybody. The color she opened her mouth again, came at the door. Rand clambered to his feet. No one would recognize Lanfear, yet if a woman were discovered in the room, a woman whom none of the maidens below had seen enter, questions would be asked, and he had no answers. But Lanfear already had a gateway open, somewhere full of white silk hangings and silver. Remember that I am your only hope of surviving, my love. It was a very cool voice in which to call someone that. Beside me, you need fear nothing. Beside me, you can rule everything that is or will be. In her snowy skirts, she stepped through, and the gateway winked shut. The knock sounded again before he could make himself push away Sidene and haul open the door. Inala peered past him, suspiciously muttering. I thought perhaps Essendra. She gave him an accusing look. Spear sisters are searching everywhere for you. No one saw you return. With a shake of her head, she straightened. She always tried to stand as tall as possible. Chiefs have come with the car kind, she said formally. They wait below. He waited on the columned portico, as it turned out, being men. The sky was still dark, but the first glimmers of dawn lined the mountains to the east. If they felt any impatience with the two maidens who stood between them and the tall doors, it did not show in their shadowed faces. The
It's clogged up a little bit.
Lon barked as soon as Rand appeared. In the rain, the Miagoma, the Shianda, every clan. Hunting Couladin or me? Rand demanded. The Shaido are moving toward the Jengai Pass, Roark said. For the others, it is too early to tell. But they are on the march with every spear not needed to defend the holds, herds, and flocks. Rand only nodded. All of his experience with someone else dictate what he would do, and now this. Whatever the other clans had, Couladin had to plan a crossing into Karian. So much for his grand schemes of imposing peace, that the Shido ravaged Karian even further while he sat in Rudion, waiting for the other clans. We move for the Jangai too, he said finally. We cannot catch him if he cautioned. Joining him, we'll be like blind worms in the sun. I won't sit here until I find out, Red said. If I can't catch Couladin, I mean to be right behind him into Karian. Rouse the spears. We leave as soon after first light as you can manage. Giving him that odd Ayul bow used only on the most formal occasions, 1 foot and extended, the chiefs departed. Only Han said anything. Shall go itself.
Chapter 7. A departure. Owning in the early morning grayness, Egwene pulled herself up onto her fog-colored mare, then had to handle her reins smartly as mist frisked about. The animal had not been ridden in weeks. Aiel not only preferred their own legs, they avoided riding almost completely. though they did use pack horses and pack mules. Even if there had been enough wood to build wagons, the terrain in the waste was not hospitable to wheels, as more than one peddler had learned, to his or her sorrow. She was not looking forward to the long journey west. The mountains hid the sun now, but the heat would grow by the hour once it climbed clear, and there would be no convenient ducking till nightfall. She was not certain that Aiel garb was suitable for riding either. The shawl worn over her head always did a surprisingly good job of keeping the sun off, but those bulky skirts would bare her legs to the thigh if she was not careful. Blisters worried her as much as modesty. The sun on one side and a month out of the saddle should not have softened her that much. She hoped it had not, or this would be a very long journey. Once she had settled Miss down, Egwene found Amis looking at her, and shared a smile with the wise one. All of that running the night before wasn't the reason she was still sleepy. If anything, it had helped her sleep even more soundly. She had found the other woman's dreams last night, and in celebration they had sipped tea in the dream, in Cold Rock's hold, early on an evening when children were playing among the crop-planted terraces, and a pleasant breeze blew down the valley as the sun sank. Of course, that would not have been enough to steal her rest, but she had been so exultant that when she left Amis's dreams she did not stop. She could not then, no matter what Amis would have said. There had been dreams all around, though with most she had no idea whose they were. With most, not all. Mylene had been dreaming of suckling a babe at her breast, and Bear of one of her dead husbands, both of them young and yellow-haired. She had been especially careful not to enter those. The wise ones would have known an intruder in an instant, and she shuddered to think of what they would have done before letting her go. Rand's dreams had been a challenge, of course, one she could not fail to face. Now that she could flit from dream to dream, how could she not try where the wise ones failed? Only, attempting to enter his dreams had been like running headlong into an invisible stone wall. She knew that his dreams lay on the other side, and she was sure she could find a way through, but there had been nothing to work on, nothing to pry at, a wall of nothing. It was a problem she meant to worry at until she solved it. Once she put her mind on something, she could be as persistent as a badger. All around her, rustling about, lurked from the camp onto mules. Long, only an Aiel or someone just as skilled would be able to tell there had ever been tents on that patch of hard clay. The same activity covered the surrounding mountain slopes, and the hubbub extended into the city as well. Not everyone would be going, but thousands would. Aiel thronged the city, as Master Kader's trains stood strung out along the harbor, laden with Maureen's selections, the three white-painted water wagons at the end of the line, like huge barrels on wheels, behind 20 mule teams. Kader's own wagon at the head of the column was a little white house on wheels, with steps at the back and a metal stovepipe sticking out of the flat roof. The thick, hawk-nosed merchant, all in ivory-colored silk today, swept off his incongruously battered hat as she rode past, his dark, tilted eyes not sharing in the wide smile he flashed at her. She ignored him frostily. His dreams had been decidedly dark and unpleasant, where they were not lewd as well. He ought to have his head dunked in a cask of blue-spine tea, she thought grimly. Approaching the roof of the maidens, she threaded her way through scurrying Gaishine and patiently standing mules. To her surprise, one of those loading the maidens' things wore a black robe, not white. A woman by the size of her, and staggering under the weight of a cord-tied on her back. Bending as she guided Mist past to get a look inside the woman's cowl, Egwene saw Isendra's haggard face, sweat already rolling down her cheeks. She was glad the maidens had stopped letting the woman go outside, or sending her out, more naked than not, but it did seem needlessly cruel to robe her in black. If she was sweating so hard already, she would nearly die once the day's heat took hold. Still, Far Darai's my business was none of hers. Avienda told her so gently but firmly. Adeline and Enila had been little short of rude about it, and a wiry white-haired maiden named Sulin had actually threatened to haul her back to the wise ones by her ear. Despite her efforts to persuade Avienda to stop addressing her as Aes Sedai, it had been irritating to find that after walking a fine line of uncertainty toward her, the rest of the maidens had come down on the side of her being just another pupil of the wise ones. Why, they would not even let her pass the door of the roof unless she claimed to be on an errand. The quickness with which she heeled mist on through the crowd had nothing to do with acceptance of Far Darais My justice, or her uncomfortable awareness that some of the maidens were eyeing her, no doubt ready to lecture if they thought she intended to interfere. It even had little to do with her dislike of Isendra. She did not want to think about her glimpse of the woman's dreams just before Cowinda had come to rouse her. They had been nightmares of torture, of things being done to the woman that sent Egwene fleeing in horror, and with something dark and evil laughing as it watched her run. No wonder Isendra looked haggard. Egwene had started up out of her sleep so quickly that Cowinda had jumped back from laying a hand on her shoulder. Rand was in the street in front of the maiden's roof, wearing a shufa against the coming sun, and a blue silk coat with enough gold embroidery to befit a palace, though it hung open halfway down the front. His belt had a new buckle, an elaborate thing shaped like a dragon. He really was beginning to think a great deal of himself, that was clear. Standing beside Giadaon, his dappled stallion, he was talking with the clan chiefs and some of the Aiel traders who would be staying in Roidion. Jason Natail, nearly at Rand's heels with his harp on his back and holding the reins of a saddled mule bought from Master Kader, was even more elaborately dressed, with silver embroidery nearly hiding his black coat and spills of white lace at his neck and cuffs. Even his boots were worked in silver where they turned down at the knee. The Gleeman's cloak with its patches did spoil the effect, but Gleemen were odd folk. The male traders wore the Kadin sword, and though their belt knives were smaller than those of warriors, Egwene knew they could all handle a spear if called to. They had something, if not all, of the deadly grace of their brothers who carried the spear. The women traders in loose white algoda blouses and full woolen skirts, headscarves and shawls were more easily distinguishable. Except for maidens and Gaishain and Avienda, Aiel women all wore multiple bracelets and necklaces of gold and ivory, silver and gemstones, some of Aiel make, some traded for, and some looted. Among Aiel traders, though, the women displayed twice as many, if not more. She caught part of what Rand was telling the traders. Give the Ogier stonemasons a free hand on some of what they build, at least. On as much as you can make yourselves. There's no point in just trying to remake the past. So he was having them send to the steading for Ogier to rebuild Roidion. That was good. Much of Tar Valon was Ogier work, and where they were left to their own devices, their buildings were enough to take the breath away. Matt was already up on his gelding pips, with his wide-brimmed hat pulled down and the butt of that odd spear resting on his hip. As usual, his high-collared green coat looked selected. She had avoided his greens. One of the maidens, a very tall, golden-haired woman, gave Matt a roguish grin that seemed to embarrass him. And well it should. She was much too old for him. Egwene sniffed. I know very well what he was dreaming about.
I'll be right back.
Very much. She only reined in beside him to look around for Avienda. Told her to be quiet. When she did, he said as she halted Mist. He nodded toward Moraine and Land, she in pale blue silk, gripping the reins of her white mare, and he in his warder's cloak, holding his great black warhorse. Lan was watching Moraine intently, expressionless as always, while she looked ready to burst with impatience as she glared at Rand. She started telling him why this is the wrong thing to do. Sounded to me like she was saying it for the 100th time, and he said, I've decided, Moraine. Stand over there and be quiet till I have time for you. Like he expected her to do as she was told. And she did. Is that steam coming out of her ears? His chortle was so pleased, so amused at his own wit, that she nearly embraced Saidar and taught him a lesson right there in front of everybody. Instead, she sniffed again, loudly enough to let him know it was for him and his wit and his amusement. He gave her a wry, sidelong look and chuckled again, which did nothing for her temper. For a moment she stared at Moiraine, perplexed. The Aes Sedai had done as Rand told her, without protest? That was like one of the wise ones obeying, or the sun rising at midnight. She had heard about the attack, of course. Rumors about giant dogs that left footprints on stone had been all over this morning. She could not see what that could have to do with this, but aside from the news of the Shido, it was the only new thing she knew of, and not enough to produce this reaction. Nothing could produce it that she could think of. Doubtless Moiraine would tell her it was none of her concern, but one way or another she would worry it out. She did not like not understanding things. Spotting Avienda, standing on the bottom step of the roof, she guided Mist around to the other side of the crowd near Rand. The Aiel woman was staring at him as hard as the Aes Sedai did, but with absolutely no expression. She kept turning the ivory bracelet on her wrist over and over, apparently without realizing it. Somehow or other that bracelet was part of the difficulty the woman was having with him. Egwene did not understand. Avienda refused to talk about it, and she could not just ask someone else, not when it might embarrass her friend. Her own flame-carved ivory bracelet was a gift from Avienda, to seal them as near sisters. Her return gift had been the silver necklace the other woman wore, which Master Kader claimed was a Kandori pattern called snowflakes. She'd had to ask Moiraine for enough money, but it had seemed appropriate for a woman who would never see snow, or would not have if she was not leaving the waste. Small chance that she could return before winter. Whatever that bracelet meant, Egwene was confident she could puzzle it out eventually. "You all right?" she asked. As she leaned out of her high-cantled saddle, her skirts shifted till her legs showed, but she was concerned enough with her friend to hardly notice. She had to repeat the question before Avienda gave a start and stared up at her. "All right? Of course I am. Let me speak to the wise ones, Avienda. I'm sure I can convince them that they cannot just make you—" She could not make herself say it. Not out here where anyone in the crowd might hear. "Does that still worry you?" Avienda shifted her gray shawl and gave a small shake of her head. "Your customs are still very strange to me." Her eyes drifted back to Rand, like iron filings drawn to a lodestone. "You do not have to be afraid of him." "I am not afraid of any man," the other woman snapped, eyes flashing blue-green fire. "I want no trouble between us, Egwene, but you should not say such things." Egwene sighed. Friend or not, Avienda was quite capable of trying to box her ears when offended enough. In any case, she was not sure she would have admitted it either. Avienda's dream had been too painful to watch for long. Naked, with an ivory bracelet, seeming to drag at her as if it weighed 100 pounds, Avienda had been running as fast as she could across a cracked clay flat. And behind her Rand came, a giant twice the size of an ogier, on a huge Geodan, slowly but inexorably catching up. But you could not simply tell a friend that she was lying. Egwene's face reddened slightly, especially not when you would have to tell her how you knew. "She would box my ears then. I won't do it again. Go rummaging about in people's dreams. Not in Avienda's dreams, anyway." It was not right to spy on a friend's dreams. Not that it was spying exactly, but still. The crowd around Rand was beginning to break up. He swung into his saddle easily, imitated promptly by Mateo. One of the traders, a broad-faced, flame-haired woman wearing a small fortune in worked gold, cut gems, and carved ivory, lingered, though. "Karakarn, do you mean to leave the threefold land forever? You have spoken as if you will never return." The others stopped at that and turned back. Silence spread on an expanding ripple of murmurs telling what had been asked. For a moment Rand was silent as well, looking around at the faces turned to him. At last he said, "I hope to return, but who can say what will happen? The wheel weaves as the wheel wills." He hesitated with every eye on him. "But I will leave you something to remember me by," he added, sticking a hand in his coat pocket. Abruptly, a fountain near the roof burst to life, water gushing from the mouths of incongruous porpoises standing on their tails. Beyond that, a statue of a young man with a horn raised to the sky suddenly was putting up a spreading fan, and then two stone women farther on were casting sprays of water from their hands. In stunned stillness, the Aiel watched as all the fountains of Roidion flowed once more. "I should have done that long since." Rand's mutter was no doubt meant for himself, but in the hush Egwene could hear him quite clearly. The splash of hundreds of fountains was the only other sound. Natael shrugged, as if he had expected no less. It was at Rand that Egwene stared, not the fountains. A man who could channel. Rand. He still ran, despite everything, but each time she saw him do it was like learning that he could all over again. Growing up, she had been taught that only the Dark One was more powerful than a man who could channel. Maybe Avienda's right to be afraid of him. But when she looked down at Avienda, open wonder shone on her face. So much water delighted the Aiel woman, as the finest silk dress might have Egwene, or a garden full of flowers. "It is time to march," Rand announced, reining the dapple westward. "Anyone who isn't ready will have to catch up." Natael followed close behind on the mule. Why did Rand let such a bootlicker stay near him? The clan chiefs immediately began to orders, and the bustle increased tenfold. Maidens and water seekers darted out, and more Far Darais Mai closed around Rand as a guard of honor, incidentally enclosing Natael. Avienda strode beside Giada, right at Rand's stirrup, easily matching the stallion stride for stride, even in her bulky skirts.
It's definitely rumbling out there.
Back behind Rand and his escort, Egwene frowned. Her friend wore that look of grim determination again, as if she had to put her arm into a viper den. "I have to do something to help her." Egwene did not give up on a problem once she had her teeth into it. Settling herself in her saddle, Moiraine patted Aldib's arched neck with a gloved hand, but she did not immediately follow Rand. Hadnan Kader was bringing his wagons up the street, driving the lead wagon himself. She should have made him tear that wagon down to carry cargo as she had the other load. The man was frightened enough of her, of Aes Sedai, to have done it. The door-frame Turangrial was lashed firmly in the wagon behind Kader, canvas tied over it tightly, so no one could fall through by accident again. A long line of Aiel, Sayadun, black eyes, strode along on either side of the wagon train. Kader bowed to her from the driver's seat, but her gaze swept on down the line of wagons, all the way to the great square surrounding the forest of slim glass columns, already sparkling in the morning light. She would have taken everything in the plaza if she could, rather than the small fraction that would fit into the wagons. Some were too large, like the 3 dull gray metal rings, each more than 2 paces across, standing on edge and joined at the middle. A braided leather rope had been strung around that one, to warn all from entering without the Wise One's permission. Not that anyone was likely to, of course. Only the clan chiefs and the Wise Ones entered that square with any sense of ease. Only the Wise Ones touched anything, and they with something approaching proper reticence. For countless years, the second test faced by an Aiel woman who wanted to be a Wise One had been to enter the array of glittering glass columns, seeing exactly what the men saw. More women survived it than men. Bear said it was because women were tougher. Amis that those too weak to survive were winnowed out before reaching that point. But it was not a certainty. Those who did survive were not marked. The Wise Ones claimed that only men needed visible signs. For a woman to be alive was enough. First test, the first winnowing before any training even, was to step through one of those 3 rings. Which one did not matter, or perhaps the choice was a matter of fate. That step seemingly took her through her life again and again, her future spread out before her, all of the possible futures based on
Be
every
right back.
decision she might make for the rest of her life. Death was possible in those, too. Some women could not face the future any more than others could face the past. All possible futures were too many for a mind to retain, of course. They jumbled together and faded away for the most part. But a woman gained a sense of things that would happen in her life, that must happen, that might happen. Usually even that was hidden until the moment was on her. Not always, though. Moiraine had been through those rings. A spoonful of hope and a cup of despair, she thought. I do not like seeing you like this, Lan said. From Mandarb's back and his own height, he looked down on her, disquiet creasing the corners of his eyes. For him, that was near tears of frustration from another man. Aiel streamed by on both sides of their horses, and Guyshine with pack animals. Moiraine was startled to realize that Kader's water wagons had already gone by. She had not realized she had been staring at the plaza for so long. Like what? She asked, turning her mare to join the throng. Rand and his escort were already out of the city. Worried, he said bluntly, no readable expression on that stone-carved face now. Afraid. I've never seen you afraid. Not when we had Trollocs and Myrddraal swarming over us. Not even when you learned the Forsaken were loose and Samael was sitting almost on top of us. Is the end coming? She gave a start, and immediately wished she had not. He was looking straight ahead over his stallion's ears, but the man never missed anything. Sometimes she thought he could see a leaf fall behind his back. Do you mean Tarman Guyton? A red bird in Selizin knows as well as I. The light send not so long as any of the seals remain unbroken. The pair she had were on one of Kader's wagons, too, each packed by itself in a cask stuffed with holes. A different wagon than the redstone doorframe, she had made sure of that. What else could I mean? He asked slowly, still not looking at her and making her wish she had bitten her tongue. You have become impatient. I can remember when you could wait weeks for one tiny scrap of information, one word, without twitching a finger. But now, he did look at her then, a blue-eyed gaze that would have intimidated most women, and most men as well. The oath you gave to the boy, Moiraine. Whatever under the light possessed you. He has been drawing further and further away from me, Lan, and I must be close to him. He needs whatever guidance I can give, and I will do everything short of sharing his bed to see that he gets it. The rings had told her that that would be a disaster. Not that she had ever considered it. The very idea still shocked her. But in the rings it was something she would or could have considered in the future. It was a measure of her growing desperation, no doubt, and in the rings she had seen that it would bring ruination on everything. She wished she could remember how. There were the keys to Randall 4 and anything she could learn about him, but only the simple fact of calamity remained in her mind. Perhaps it will help your humility grow if he tells you to fetch his slippers and light his pipe. She stared at him. Could that be a joke? If so, it must be. She had never found that humility served very well in any situation. Swan claimed that growing up in the Sun Palace in Kyrian had put arrogance deeply into Moiraine's bones, where she could not even see it, something she firmly denied. But for all that Swan was a Tyran fisherman's daughter, she could match any queen stare for stare, and to her, arrogance meant opposition to her own plans. If Lan was attempting jokes, however feeble and wrong-headed, he was changing. For nearly 20 years he had her and saved her life more times than she cared to count, often at great risk to his own. Always he had accounted his life a small thing, valuable only for her need of it. Some said he wooed death the way a bridegroom wooed his bride. She had never held his heart, and never felt jealousy toward the women who seemed to throw themselves at his feet. He had long claimed that he had no heart, but he had found one this past year, found it when a woman tied it on a string to hang around her neck. He denied her, of course, not his love for naive Almira, once a wisdom in the Two Rivers and now an accepted at the White Tower, but that he could ever have her. He had two things, he said, a sword that would not break and a war that could not end. He would never gift a bride with those. That, at least, Moiraine had taken care of, though he would not know how until it was done. If he did, he would very probably try to change matters, stubborn fool man that he could be. This arid land seems to have withered your own humility, Aulan Mandragoran. I shall have to find some water to make it grow again. My humility is home to razor sharpness, he told her dryly. You never let it grow too down. Wetting a white scarf from his leather water bottle, he handed her the sodden cloth. She tied it around her temples without comment. The sun was beginning to rise above the mountains behind them, a searing ball of molten gold. The thick columns snaked up the barren side of Cheyendair, its tail still in Rhydion when its head had crested the slope, then down onto rough hilly flats dotted with rock spires and flat-topped buttes, streaked with red or ochre, and gray or brown. The air was so clear that Moiraine could see for miles, even after they were down off Cheyendair. Great natural arches reared, and in every direction jagged mountains clawed at the sky. Dry gullies and hollows split a land sparsely dotted with low thorny bushes and leafless spiny plants. The rare tree, gnarled and stunted, usually bore spines or thorns as well. The sun made it an oven, a hard land that had shaped a hard people. But Lan was not the only one changing, or being changed. She wished she could see what Rand would make of the Aiel in the end. There was a long journey ahead for everyone. Drake, over the border. Kneeling to her perch at the rear of the jouncing wagon, Nynaeve used one hand for herself and one for her straw hat as she peered back at the furious dust storm dwindling behind them in the distance. The broad brim shaded her face in the morning heat, but the breeze generated by the wagon's rumbling speed was enough to snatch it from her head, despite the dark red scarf tied under her chin. Low-hilled grassland with occasional thickets rolled by, the grass sere and thin in the late summer heat. Dust churned up by the wagon wheels obscured her vision somewhat, and made her cough besides. The white clouds in the sky lied. There had been no rain since before they left Tanchico, weeks earlier, and it had been some time since the wide road had borne the traffic of wagons that once kept it hard packed. No one appeared riding out of that seemingly solid wall of brown, which was just as well. She had lost her anger at brigands trying to stop them this close to escaping the madness of Tarabon, and unless she was angry she could not sense the true source, much less channel. Even angry, she had been surprised at being able to raise such a storm. Once whipped up, full of her fury, it held a life of its own. Elaine had been startled at the size of it too, though thankfully she had not let on to Tom or Jewelin. But even if her strength was increasing, her teachers in the tower had said that it would, and certainly none of them was strong enough to best one of the Forsaken as she had. Even with that, she still had that limitation. Had any of the bandits appeared, Elaine would have had to deal with them alone, and she did not want that. Her earlier anger was gone, but she was making fine for another crop. Awkwardly climbing up over the canvas lashed across the load of casks, she reached down to one of the water barrels fastened along the sides of the wagon, together with the chests of their possessions and supplies. Immediately her hat was on the back of her head, held only by the scarf. Her fingers could just touch the lid of the barrel, unless she released the rope that she was gripping with her other hand, and the way the wagon was lurching along, that would probably send her off onto her nose. Jewelin Sandar guided the lanky brown gelding he was riding. Skulker was the improbable name he had put on the animal, close to the wagon, and reached over to hand her one of the leather water bottles slung about his saddle. She drank gratefully, though not gracefully. Hanging there like a bunch of grapes on a wind-blown vine, she spilled nearly as much water down the front of her good gray dress as she did down her throat. It was a suitable dress for a merchant, high-necked, finely woven, and well cut, but still plain. The pin on her breast, a small circle of dark garnets and gold, was perhaps too much for a merchant, but it had been a gift from the Panarch of Tarabon, along with other jewelry, much richer, hidden in a compartment beneath the wagon driver's seat. She wore it to remind herself that even women who sat on thrones sometimes needed to be taken by the scruff of the neck and shaken. She had a little more sympathy for the tower's manipulations of kings and queens now that she had dealt with Amathera. She suspected that Amathera had meant her gifts as a bribe to make them depart Tanchico. The woman had been willing to buy a ship so that they would not remain an hour more than necessary, but no one had been willing to sell. The few vessels remaining in Tanchico harbor that were suitable for more than coasting had been jammed with refugees. Besides, a ship was the obvious way, the fastest way to leave, and the Black Adja might well be watching for her and Elaine after what had happened. They had been sent to hunt Aes Sedai, who were dark friends, not to be ambushed by them. Thus the wagon and the long trek across a land torn by civil war and anarchy. She was beginning to wish she had not insisted on avoiding the ships. Not that she would ever admit it to the others. When she tried to hand the water bottle back to Julian, he waved it away. A tough man, seemingly carved from some dark wood, he was not very comfortable on the back of a horse. He looked ridiculous to her, not because of his obvious ill-ease in the saddle, but for the silly red Tarabonner hat that he had taken to wearing on his flat black hair. A brimless, conical thing, tall and flat-topped. It did not go well with his dark Tyrant coat, tight to the waist, then flaring. She did not think it would go well with anything. In her opinion, he looked as if he were wearing a cake on his head. It was clumsy, scrabbling the rest of the way forward with the leather bottle in one hand and her hat flapping, and she did it muttering imprecations for the Tyrant thief-catcher. Never a thief-taker, not him. For Tom Maryland, puffed-up glee man, and for Elaine of House Krakand, daughter-heir of Andor, who ought to be shaken by the scruff of the neck herself. She meant to slide onto the wooden driver's seat between Tom and Elaine, but the golden-haired girl was pressed tightly against Tom, her own straw hat hanging on her back. She was clutching the white-mustached old fool's arm as if afraid of falling off. Tight-mouthed, Nynaeve had to settle for Elaine's other side. She was glad she had her hair in one proper braid again, wrist-thick and hanging down to her waist. She could give it a tug instead of thumping Elaine's ear for her. The girl had used to seem reasonably sensible, but something seemed to have addled her wits in Tanchico. "They aren't following us any more," Nynaeve announced, pulling her hat back into place. "You can slow this thing down now, Tom." She could have shouted that from the back, and not needed to clamber over the casks, but the image of herself bouncing about and calling for them to slow had stopped her. She did not like making a fool of herself, and liked even less others seeing her in a foolish light. "Put your hat on," she told Elaine. "That fair skin of yours will not appreciate this sun for long." As she had half expected, the girl ignored her friendly advice. "You drive so wonderfully," Elaine gushed as Tom drew back on the reins, pulling the four-horse team to a walk. "You were in control every minute." The tall, wiry man glanced down at her, bushy white eyebrows twitching, but all he said was, "We have more company ahead, child." Well, maybe he was not such a fool. Nynaeve looked and saw the snowy-cloaked mounted column approaching them over the next low rise, perhaps 100 men in burnished mail and shining conical helmets, escorting as many heavily laden wagons, children of the light. She was suddenly very conscious of the leather thong hanging around her neck beneath her dress, and the 2 rings dangling between her breasts. Lan's heavy gold signet ring, the ring of the kings of lost Malkir, would mean nothing to the white cloaks, but if they saw the great serpent ring, fool woman, They aren't likely to unless you decide to undress. Hastily, she ran an eye over her companions. Elaine could not stop being beautiful, and now that she had let go of Tom and was retying the green scarf that held her hat, her manner looked more suited to a throne room than a merchant's wagon. But aside from being blue, her dress was no different from Nynaeve's. She wore no jewelry. She had called Amathera's gifts gaudy. She would pass. She had done so 50 times since Tanchico. Barely. Only, this was the first meeting with white cloaks. Tom, in stout brown wool, could have been any of 1,000 gnarled, white-haired men who worked wagons. And Julian was Julian. He knew how to behave, though he looked as though he wished he were sure-footed on the ground, with his staff or the slotted sword-breaker he wore at his belt, rather than on a horse. Tom drew the team over to one side of the road and halted as several white cloaks broke away from the head of the column. Nynaeve put on a welcoming smile. She hoped they had not decided that they needed another wagon. "The light illumine you, Captain," she said to the narrow-faced man who was obviously the leader, the only one not carrying a steel-tipped lance. She had no idea what rank the two golden knots signified on the breast of his cloak, right below the flaring sunburst they all wore, but in her experience men would accept any flattery. "We are very glad to see you. Bandits tried to rob us a few miles back, but a dust storm appeared like a miracle. We barely escaped." "You are a merchant?" "Few merchants have come out of Tarabon in some time." The man's voice was as harsh as his face, and
I'll
that
be
looked
right
as
back.
though all joy had been boiled out of it before he left the cradle. Suspicion filled his dark, deep-set eyes. Nynaeve did not doubt that was permanent, too. "Bound to where? With what?" "Carry dyes, Captain." She worked to maintain her smile under that steady, unblinking stare. It was a relief when he shifted it to the others briefly. Tom was making a good job of appearing bored, just a wagon driver who would be paid stopped or moving. And if Julian had not snatched off that ridiculous hat as he once would have, at least he seemed no more than idly interested, a hired man with nothing to hide. When the white cloak's gaze dropped to Elaine, Nynaeve felt the other woman stiffen and hurried on. "Tarabonner dyes, the finest in the world. I can get a good price for them in Andor." At a signal from the captain, or whatever he was, one of the other white cloaks heeled his horse to the back of the wagon. Slicing one of the ropes with his dagger, he jerked some of the canvas loose, enough to expose 3 or 4 casks. "They're branded Tanchico, Lieutenant. This one says Crimson. Do you want me to break open a few?" Nynaeve hoped the white cloak officer took the anxiety on her face the right way. Even without looking at her, she could all but feel Elaine wanting to call the soldier down for his manners, but any real merchant would be worried at having dyes exposed to the elements. "If you will show me the ones you want opened, Captain, I will be more than happy to do it myself." The man showed no response at all to flattery or offers of cooperation. "The casks were sealed to keep out dust and water, you see. If the cask head is broken, I'll never be able to cover it over with wax again here." The rest of the column reached them and began to pass in a cloud of dust. The wagon drivers were roughly dressed, nondescript men, but the soldiers rode stiffly erect, their long steel lance points all slanted at exactly the same angle. Even sweaty-faced and coated with dust, they looked hard men. Only the drivers glanced at Nynaeve and the others. The white-cloaked lieutenant waved dust away from his face with one gauntleted hand, then motioned the man back from the wagon. His eyes never left Nynaeve. "You come from Tanchico." Nynaeve nodded, a picture of cooperation and openness. "Yes, Captain. Tanchico." "What word have you of the city? There have been rumors." "Rumors, Captain? When we left, there was little order remaining. The city was full of refugees, and the countryside of rebels and bandits. Trade hardly exists. That was the truth, pure and simple. That's why these dyes will fetch particularly good prices. There will be no more Tarabonner dyes available for a long while, I think." I do not care about refugees, trade, or dyes, merchant, the officer said in flat tones. Was Andric still on the throne? Yes, Captain. Obviously, rumor said someone had taken Tanchico and supplanted the king, and perhaps someone had. But who? One of the rebel lords who fought each other as hard as they did Andric? Or the dragon sworn who had pledged themselves to the dragon reborn without ever seeing him? Andric was still king and Amathera still panarch when we left. His eyes said she could be lying. It is said the Tarvalan witches were involved. Did you see any Aes Sedai or hear of them? No, Captain, she said quickly. The great serpent ring seemed hot against her skin. 50 white cloaks, close at hand. A dust storm would not help this time, and anyway, though she tried to deny it, she was more scared than angry. Plain merchants don't mingle with that sort. He nodded, and she risked adding a question, anything to change the subject. If you please, Captain, have we entered Amadicia yet? The border is 5 miles east, he pronounced. For the time being. The first village you come to will be Mardisen. Obey the law and you will be well. There is a garrison of the children there. He sounded as if the garrison would spend all of its time making sure they did obey the law. Have you come to move the border? Elaine asked suddenly and coolly. Nynaeve could have strangled her. The deep-set, suspicious eyes shifted to Elaine, and Nynaeve said hastily, Forgive her, my lord captain. My eldest sister's girl. She thinks she should have been born a lady, and she can't keep away from the boys besides. That's why her mother sent her to me. Elaine's indignant gasp was perfect. It was also probably quite real. Nynaeve supposed she had not needed to add that about boys, but it seemed to fit. Whitecloak stared at them a moment longer, then said, The Lord Captain Commander sends food into Tarabon. Otherwise, we would have Taraboner vermin over the border and stealing anything they could chew. Walk in the light, he added, before swinging his horse to gallop back to the head of the column. It was neither suggestion nor blessing. Tom got the wagon moving as soon as the officer left, but everyone sat silent, except for coughing, until they were well beyond the last soldier and out of the other wagon's dust. Swallowing a little water to wet her throat, Nynaeve pushed the water bottle at Elaine. What did you mean back there? She demanded. We aren't in your mother's throne room, and your mother would not stand for it anyway. Elaine emptied the rest of the leather bottle before deigning to reply. You were crawling, Nynaeve. She pitched her voice high in a mock servility. I am very good and obedient, Captain. May I kiss your boots, Captain? We're supposed to be merchants, not queens in disguise. Merchants do not have to be lick-spittles. You are lucky he didn't think we were trying to hide something, acting so servile. They don't stare down their noses at white cloaks with 50 lances either. Or did you think we could overwhelm them all with the power if need be? Why did you tell him I could not keep away from boys? There was no need for that, Nynaeve. I was ready to tell him anything that would make him go away and leave us alone, and you, both of you, shut up, Tom barked suddenly, before they come back to see which of you is murdering the other. Nynaeve actually twisted around on the wooden seat to look back before she realized the white cloaks were too far off to hear, even if they'd been shouting. Well, maybe they had been. It did not help that Elaine did the same. Nynaeve took a firm hold on her braid and glared at Tom, but Elaine snuggled herself against his arm and practically cooed. You are right, Tom. I am sorry I raised my voice. Julian was watching them sideways, pretending not to, but he was wise enough not to bring his horse close enough to become part of it. Letting go of her braid before she pulled it out by the roots, Nynaeve adjusted her hat and sat staring straight ahead over the horses. Whatever had gotten into the girl, it was high time to get it out again. Only a tall stone pillar to each side of the road marked the border between Tarabon and Amadicia. There was no traffic on the road but them. The hills gradually became a little higher, but otherwise the land remained much the same. brown grass and thickets with few green leaves except on pine or leatherleaf or other evergreens. Stone-fenced fields and thatch-roofed stone farmhouses dotted the slopes and dells, but they had a look of abandonment. No smoke rising from chimneys, no men working crops, no sheep or cows. Sometimes a few chickens scratched in a farmyard near the road, but they scurried away, gone feral, at the wagon's approach. White cloak garrison or no, apparently no one was willing to risk Tarrabonner brigands this close to the border. When Mardison appeared from the top of a rise, the sun still had a long way to climb to its zenith. The town ahead looked too big for the name of village, nearly a mile across, straddling a small bridged stream between two hills, with as many slate roofs as thatched, and considerable bustle in the wide streets. "We need to buy supplies," Nynaeve said, "but we want to be quick about it. We can cover a lot of ground yet before nightfall." "We are wearing out, Nynaeve," Tom said. "First light to last light every day for nearly a month. One day resting will not make much difference in reaching Tarvalon." He did not sound tired. More likely he was looking forward to playing his harp or his flute in one of the taverns, and getting men to buy him wine. Jewelin had finally brought his mount close to the wagon, and he added, "I could do with a day on my feet. I do not know whether this saddle or that wagon seat is worse." "I think we should find an inn," Elaine said, looking up at Tom. "I have had quite enough of sleeping under this wagon, and I would like to listen to you tell stories in the common room." "One-wagon merchants are little more than peddlers," Nynaeve said sharply. "They cannot afford inns in a town like this." She did not know whether that was true or not, but despite her own desire for a bath and clean sheets, she was not going to let the girl get away with directing the suggestion at Tom. It was not until the words were out of her mouth that she realized that she had given in to Tom and Julian. "One day won't hurt. It's a long way to Tarvalon yet." She wished she had insisted on a ship. With a fast ship, a seafolk raker, they could have gotten to Tyr in a third of what it had taken them to cross Tarabon, as long as they had good winds. And with the right Alpha on Nier windfinder, that would have been no problem. She or Elaine could have handled it, for that matter. The Tyrants knew that she and Elaine were friends of Rand's, and she expected that they still sweated buckets for fear of offending the Dragon Reborn. They would have provided a carriage and escort for the journey up to Tarvalon. "Find us a place to camp," she said reluctantly. She should have insisted on a ship. They might have been back in the tower by now. Chapter 9. A Signal. Nynaeve had to admit that Tom and Jewelin between them had chosen a good campsite, a sparse thicket growing on an eastern slope, covered with dead leaves, a scant mile from Mardison. Scattered sour gums and some sort of small, droopy-branched willow screened the wagon from the road and the town, and a 2-foot-wide rivulet ran from a stone outcrop near the top of the rise, down a bed of dried mud twice as broad. Enough water for their purposes. It was even a little cooler under the trees, with a small and welcome breeze. Once the two men had the team and hobbled them where the horses could feed on the sparse grass upslope, they tossed a coin to decide which should take the lanky gelding into Mardison to purchase what they needed. The coin flipping was a ritual that they had developed. Tom, whose nimble fingers were used to performing sleight of hand, never lost when he flipped the coin, so Jewelin always did it now. Tom won anyway, and while he was stripping the saddle from Skulker, Nynaeve put her head under the wagon seat and levered up a floorboard with her belt knife. Besides 2 small gilded coffers containing Amathera's presents of jewelry, several leather purses bulging with coin lay in the recess. The Panarch had been more than generous in her desire to see their backs. The other things looked trifling by comparison. A small dark wooden box, polished but plain and uncarved, and a wash-leather purse lying flat and showing the impression of a disc inside. The box held the 2 Turangrial they had recovered from the Black Adja, both linked to dreams, and the purse, that was their prize from Tanchico, one of the seals on the Dark One's prison. As much as she wanted to find out where Swan Sanche wanted them to chase the Black Aja next, the seal was the source of her haste to reach Tarvalon. Digging coins from one of the fat purses, she avoided touching the flat purse. The longer it remained in her possession, the more she wanted to hand it to the Amerlin and be done with it. Sometimes she thought she could feel the pressure trying to break through when she was near the thing. She saw Tom off with a flower and a strong admonition to search out some fruit and green vegetables. Either man was likely as not to buy nothing but meat and beans, left to himself. Tom's limp as he led the horse off toward the road made her grimace. An old injury, and nothing to be done for it now, so Moiraine said. That rankled as much as the limp itself. Nothing to be done. When she had left the two rivers, it had been to protect young people from her village, snatched away in the night by an Aes Sedai. She had gone to the tower still with the hope that she could somehow shelter them, and the added ambition of bringing down Moiraine for what she had done. The world had changed since then, or maybe she only saw the world differently. No, it is not me that's changed. I'm the same. It is everything else that's different. Now it was all she could do to protect herself. Rand was what he was, and no turning back. And Egwene eagerly went her own way, not letting anyone or anything hold her back, even if her way led over a cliff. And Matt had learned to think of nothing but women, carousing, and gambling. She even found herself sympathizing with Moiraine sometimes, to her disgust. At least Perrin had gone back home, or so she had heard through Egwene, second-hand from Rand. Perhaps Perrin was safe. Hunting the Black Aja was good and right and satisfying, and also terrifying, though she tried to hide that part. She was a grown woman, not a girl who needed to hide in her mother's apron. Yet that was not the main reason she was willing to keep on bashing her head against a wall, keep on trying to learn to use the power, when most of the time she could not channel any more than Tom. That reason was the talent called healing. As wisdom of Emond's Field, it had been gratifying to bring the women's circle around to her way of thinking, especially since most were old enough to be her mother. With not many years on Elaine, she had been the youngest wisdom ever in the Two Rivers, and even more so to see that the village council did what they should, stubborn men that they were. The most satisfaction, though, had always come from finding the right combination of herbs to cure an illness, to heal with the one power. She had done it, fumbling, curing what her other skills never could. The joy of it was enough to bring tears. One day she meant to heal Tom and watch him dance. One day she would even heal that wound in Rand's side. Surely there was nothing that could not be healed, not if the woman wielding the power was determined enough. When she turned from watching Tom go, she found that Elaine had filled the bucket that normally hung beneath the wagon and was kneeling to wash her hands and face, a towel around her shoulders to keep her dress dry. That was something she particularly wanted to do herself. In this heat it was pleasant sometimes to wash in water cool from a stream. Often enough there had been no water but what was in the barrels strapped to the wagon, and that was needed for drinking and cooking more than washing. Julian was sitting with his back against one of the wagon wheels, his thumb-thick staff of pale ridged wood leaning next to him. His head was down, that silly hat tipped precariously over his eyes, but she was not willing to bet on even a man sleeping at this time of the morning. There were things he and Tom did not know, things it was best they did not know. Thick carpet of dead sour gum leaves crackled as she seated herself near Elaine. "Do you think Tanchico really has fallen?" Rubbing a soapy cloth slowly across her face, the other woman did not reply. Again, "I think that White Cloak's Aes Sedai were us." "Perhaps." Elaine's voice was cool, a pronouncement from the throne. Her eyes were blue ice. She did not look at Nynaeve. "And perhaps reports of what we did got tangled with other rumors. Tarabon could have a new king and a new Panot very easily." Nynaeve kept her temper in check and her hands away from her braid. They clutched her knees instead. You are trying to put her at ease with you. Watch your tongue. Amathera was difficult, but I do not wish her any harm. Do you? A pretty woman, Jewelin said, especially in one of those Tara Bonner serving girl's dresses with a pretty smile. I thought she... He saw Elaine and her looking at him and quickly pulled his hat back down, pretending to sleep again. She and Elaine shared a glance, and she knew the other's thought was the same as hers. Men. Whatever has happened to Amathera, Nynaeve? She is behind us now. Elaine sounded more normal. Her washcloth flowed. I wish her well, but mainly I hope the Black Aja is not behind us. Not following, I mean. Julian stirred uneasily without raising his head. He was still uncomfortable with the knowledge that Black Aes Sedai were real and not simply a tale in the streets. Should be happy he doesn't have our knowledge. Nynaeve had to admit that the thought was not entirely logical, but if he had known about the Forsaken being loose, even Rand's foolish instruction to look after her and Elaine would not have kept him from running. Still, he was useful at times, he and Tom both. It had been Moiraine who had fastened Tom to them, and the man knew a great deal about the world for an ordinary gleeman. If they were following, they'd have caught up by now. That was surely true, considering the usual lumbering speed of the wagon. With any luck, they still do not know who we are. Elaine nodded, grim but her old self again, and began rinsing her face. She could be almost as determined as a Two Rivers woman. Leandrin and most of her cronies surely escaped from Tanchico, maybe all of them, and we still don't know who is giving orders for the Black Aja in the tower. As Rand would say, we still have it to do, Nynaeve. Despite herself, Nynaeve winced. True, they had a list of 11 names, but once they were back in the tower, almost any Aes Sedai they spoke to might be Black Aja, or any women they encountered on the road. For that matter, anyone they met might be a dark friend. But that was hardly the same thing, not by a wide degree. More than the Black Aja, Elaine continued. I worry about Nynaeve put a quick hand on her arm and nodded slightly toward Julian. Elaine coughed and went on as though that was what had stopped her. About Mother. She has no reason to like you, Nynaeve. Quite the opposite. She's far away from here. Nynaeve was glad her voice was steady. They were not talking about Elaine's mother, but the Forsaken she had defeated. Part of her hoped fervently that Mogadine was far away, very far. If she was not? She is, Nynaeve said firmly, but she still hitched her shoulders uncomfortably. A part of her remembered humiliations suffered at Mogadine's hands, and desired nothing more than to face the woman again, to defeat her again, for good this time. Only, what if Mogadine took her by surprise, came at her when she was not angry enough to channel? The same was true of any of the Forsaken, of course, or of any Black Sister for that matter. But after her rout in Tanchico, Mogadine had reason to hate her personally. Not pleasant at all to think that one of the Forsaken knew your name and likely wanted your head. That is just rank cowardice, she told herself sharply. You are not a coward, and you will not be. That did not stop the itch between her shoulder blades every time Mogadine came to mind, as if the woman was staring at her back. I suppose looking over my shoulder for bandits has made me nervous, Elaine said casually, patting her face with the towel. Why, sometimes when I dream of late, I have the feeling that someone is watching me. Eve gave a start at what seemed an echo of her own thoughts, but then she realized there had been a slight emphasis on dream. Not any dreams, but Tel Iran Riot, another thing the men did not know about. She had had the same sensation, but then there was often a feel of unseen eyes in the world of dreams. It could be uncomfortable, but they had discussed the sensation before. She made her voice light. Well, your mother is not in our dreams, Elaine, or she would probably snatch us both up by an ear. Mogadine would probably torture them until they begged for death, or arrange a circle of 13 black sisters and 13 murgrol. They could turn you to the shadow against your will that way, bind you to the Dark One. Maybe Mogadine could even do it by herself. Don't be ridiculous, woman. If she could have, she would have. You beat her, remember? I do hope not, the other woman replied soberly. Do you mean to give me a chance to wash? Nynaeve asked irritably. Putting the girl at ease was all very well, but she could do with less talk of Mogadine. The Forsaken had to be somewhere distant. She would not have let them come this far peacefully if she knew where they were. Light said that that's true. Lane emptied and refilled the bucket herself. She was a very nice girl usually, when she remembered that she was not in the royal palace in Camelin, and when she was not acting the fool. That Nynaeve would take care of when Tom came back. Once Nynaeve had enjoyed a slow, cooling wash of face and hands, she set about making the camp ready, and put Julian to breaking dead branches from the trees for a fire. By the time Tom returned with 2 wicker hampers slung across the gelding's back, her and Elaine's blankets were laid out under the wagon, and the 2 men's under the hanging branches of one of the 20-foot willows. A good supply of firewood had been stacked. The tea kettle stood cooling beside the ashes of a fire in a circle cleared of leaves, and the thick pottery cups had been washed. Julian was grumbling to himself as he caught water in the tiny stream to refill the water barrels. From the snatches Nynaeve heard, she was glad he kept most of it to an inaudible mutter. From her perch on one of the wagon shafts, Elaine hardly tried to hide her interested attempt to make out what he was saying. Both she and Nynaeve had put on clean dresses on the other side of the wagon, switching colors as it happened. After fastening hobbles between the gelding's forelegs, Tom lifted the heavy hampers down easily and began unpacking them. Mardeason's not as prosperous as it looks from a distance. He set a net bag of small apples on the ground, and another of some dark green leafy vegetable. With no trade into Tarabon, the town is withering. The rest seemed to be all sacks of dried beans and turnips, plus pepper-cured beef and salt-cured hams, and a gray pottery bottle sealed with wax that Nynaeve was sure held brandy. Both men had complained of not having a bit of something with their pipes of an evening. You can hardly take 6 steps without seeing a white cloak or 2. The garrison looked.
Alright, everyone, I'm gonna call into this live for tonight. I want to thank Ellen for stopping by. Excuse me. And everyone keep stopping by. I appreciate all y'all support. Till next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe.